The False Springs in Sudan and Algeria jns.org. Remember me. A decade later, many believed the Syrian president had urged waves of popular unrest flooded a number of Arab countries and toppled regimes previously perceived as strong and impervious to harm. Everyone rushed to we know how the story ended. In some of these countries now, after an 8-year delay, a false Arab Spring similar to its predecessors is knocking on the door of the Arab countries it previously spared, chief among them Algeria and Sudan. In Algeria, the masses have taken to the streets to protest President Abdelaziz Bouteflika's intention to vie for a fifth term in the country's April presidential election. The 82-year. Meanwhile, in Sudan, protests erupted 2 months ago following a government price hike on bread. Thousands poured in. At this point, the events in Sudan and Algeria look like a rerun of the Arab Spring of 2011, and it seems likely that Bouteflika and al-Bashir will both have to step down. We can already end. Ultimately, the common denominator among all the dictators toppled during the Arab Spring was their old age and their failure to find powerful allies within the system to help them maintain their grip on power. This is the main The Middle East still isn't ripe for democracy. In the eyes of many, it appears, however, that instead of leading the region forward, these demonstrations will only entrench the past. Eyal Zisser is a lecturer in the Middle East History Department at Tel Aviv University.
Raindrop, truck top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.